Hi, I'm Anant Srivastav. I right now work as a technical director for Not So Secure Global Services. We're a boutique pen testing firm, and my work ranges from doing the regular pen testing to managing the teams to basically looking at everything technical within the organization, be it the pen testing side of things, be it the training sides of things, all of it.
What are you specializing in which field? I'm sure you are going in product security or application security in general. Also, I know that you're a great mentor, so I'm sure you must be using that as well, leading teams, encouraging people to get into infosec. What are the areas you are specializing now?
So it's a mixed bag of all those things. We have recently started taking up, say, freshers or interns. Uh, till last year, we were only hiring people with 2 years or more experience because we were a very small niche team and we wanted to just get people who are just starting in a running mode and we don't have to handhold them a lot. But within the organization itself, there are differences in how each organization operates. So some of the organizations might say, hey, you found an SQL injection, you stop right there. Our organization has had a take from the very beginning that, hey, you found SQL injection, that's good. What else? How much deep can you go with that? And the aim generally is to give the say consumer or our customer the maximum value of the money that they've spent. And that basically means doing deep dives and understanding scenarios. And then with the training component attached to it, it basically becomes like any interesting thing that we encounter in a pen test. We then have to, once the pen test is done, sit down, research around that, come up with an idea around how this could be done. Or at times it is within the project itself, we have found various ways, bypasses. And then all of that knowledge is what we translate into our courses, which we run at all those major conferences. So that's one aspect. Building teams around different areas is something that I've been working on. So like you said, the mentor part. So I've been leading the entire initiative in the company. Uh, we started with having 2 or 3 people with core interests into web, mobile, and infra, to right now where we have a very solid pen testing team which deals with web, mobile, infra, code review, any of those aspects. And we are now forming a team which is basically dealing with the DevSecOps side of things. So within an organization, if you have security set up, or if you want to start involving security practices, how do you go about doing that? Right from, say, threat modeling phase to the end delivery, be it CI/CD pipeline, be it uh, finding the right set of tool, or building that culture within the organization. So we are now exposing ourselves into that area also. So that's another new side that is being worked on within Not So Secure. And if you look at the blogs, you'd see more and more work being done in that area also. Cloud and infrastructure, these have been two areas where a lot of focus have been initially, but now it's cloud, DevSecOps, infrastructure, mobile, web. All of these areas are being worked on. As the team grows, you can spread your wings.
Sure. What is your story? How did you get into information security?
Okay, that's a funny story, to be honest. I got introduced to computers somewhere around 1998 because my sisters were doing MCA. And that's the time when my father basically bought a computer, and I got introduced to a 486 DX2 machine with 16 MB RAM, and I think 850 MB of hard disk space. And somewhere around that time, we bought a PC Quest magazine, and there was a disk in it which everyone discarded because it was a Linux distribution. Now, cut to 2 years later, I basically found that CD and I was like, okay, yeah, what is this? And that's when I went to my school and I was like, okay, computers, school computer teacher, they would know. So I asked them, hey, what is this? And their answer was, hey, I don't know what it is, but people who know about this are generally people who are of a high caliber. So that was like a kick point that, hey, if I know Linux, I would be among those few people who know this unique thing. And that's how I started looking at understanding what Linux is. So around 2000 is when I started working with Linux, installing Linux on my own system, trying to hide it from my sisters, kind of things, going to a point where at that time, Linux user groups were very popular online. So Yahoo groups. So we had Linux user group Manipur to Bangalore to bunch of other cities. So I was kind of part of around 30, 40 odd Linux user groups within India. And the Linux user group for Bhopal, which was my hometown, people liked what I was doing. So they promoted me as a moderator. So I think around 2004, which was 12th standard of mine, I was the moderator for Linux user group Bhopal, and we were kind of trying to grow our knowledge and talk with each other, just communicate. It was more of the time frame when internet was restricted. So I would have an alarm clock. Morning, I would basically run that one script, which will download all the emails. The entire day, I would write responses for all of them. Evening, I would again send all of them in one bulk shot. So that was fun time frame. But that's how I basically started with computers. Now, when it came to doing the graduation, I had two options. I wanted to go with doing BCA and then MCA and that part because I wanted to do things in computers. My father basically gave me a better option. He said, hey, instead of doing that, go for engineering. You spend 4 years. The degree of engineering is kind of equivalent to an MCA degree. So you save 2 years there. But parallelly, you also get to learn another area because computers is your interest. You're anyways going to work on computers. So you learn something else also. So that's where I basically ended up joining electronics and instrumentation engineering, because that was one branch which had a large overlap with computer science department. So as part of my curriculum, although I'm not part of computer science or information technology fields, but I have studied operating system to telecom stack to AI and bunch of other subjects were part of my curriculum. Now, after doing all of that, there was a campus placement, got placed into a company. While this was happening, parallelly, I was involved with Linux user groups. Linux world was moving ahead. One of my friend basically suggested, hey, there is this Red Hat specialized courses, Red Hat certified engineer courses. You should do that. So I joined that class when I was in, I think, first year. And everyone in my group was either in final year or was a senior who has completed their graduation. So I was the youngest in there, started learning those things. And then one of them basically started a local institute here. And they said, hey, you seem to have a way of talking about these things. You're passionate about it. Would you like to join us and teach people? So I was like, fine, I'll join it under one condition. And the condition that I put it was, I would teach for 4 hours, but I would be there at your premise for 8 hours. Remaining 4 hours, whatever I do with your desktops, you're not going to ask questions to me. So 2006 to 8, 2 years, I basically did all sorts of experimentation, from Red Hat to Fedora to CentOS to Ubuntu to Debian to Slackware. Name any distribution of Linux, I would have tried it, ran a bunch of tests on it, and would have practiced around it. 2008, campus selection happened. I basically went to Tech Mahindra. The work there was not exactly, I would say, IT related, although we were trained in Java and SQL and all of that, but the work was non-IT related. But the problem that we found there, or the solution that we made, was the project where we were working was a telecom management project, and they don't have a management software in there. So we ended up creating a sort of an automation around our work that we were doing. So on one side, we were automating the work that we were doing, which ranged from doing text parsing on an incoming email to writing an Outlook based macro, which can auto assign emails based on their content or the sender or the recipient, and edit subject lines and do a bunch of things there, to building a portfolio system where uh, a person who is on ground can basically make entries that whatever work they're doing, to their managers can see how the team is performing, to the group manager can see how the whole group is performing, to a VP can view what's the problems versus success ratio, to if they want to drill down into say issues within the project, so they would get a Pareto analysis 80-20 kind of a graph, and they could see that these are the areas that I need to focus on and get sorted. So all those sort of things I worked on as part of my 2 years in Tech Mahindra. This was the time frame when on one side, till this point, I have not done any certification. This was the point where I was like, okay, this is not working out. I need to do something about my life. This is not how I want to be. I'm liking what I'm doing, but this is not officially part of my work. So I started looking at options, and this was more of we were writing code, but I was more involved from a system administration point of view, which is what the Red Hat or Linux background basically taught me. Now, system administration, if you couple it with, say, a natural progression, the natural progression becomes you become a defender against security risks. So I started looking at that aspect, that, hey, how do I safeguard myself against this? And that's when I was introduced, hey, there's the other side of the story also, and I could make a living by finding flaws also. So that's when I was like, okay, yeah, if I want to go into this area, what do I do? And the one answer which some of you might think is a shameful act of mine, I ended up doing CEH.
It is okay. It is a good starting point.
Oh yeah, I mean, at that point, for someone who was not in information security domain, someone who's sitting outside of the industry, wanted to get into the industry, I was not even getting the interviews. Just to get to the interview, I needed that CEH certification on my file. So I did the CEH certification. I completed RHCE certification, got into a contractual opportunity with a multinational, worked for 6 months there, did a lot of automation around their report review processes. So they had a process where every quarter they would run vulnerability analysis, VA scans. So they would run SSS scans 45 days. Once those scans are done, they would do Excel sheet analysis, and then they would send reports to each division. The entire process used to take 3 months. By the time they're done with all of this, they have the next iteration to start with. So the entire year, they're just running scans. So I ended up helping them automating the bits. So the profiles were created in the system, and automated scans would run every 3 months. And the reports would basically get generated, get pulled into a database system. And then I would basically have an automation which would do false positive reduction. In organizations, you generally have those accepted risk entries. Like, this is a vulnerability, I know about it, I am not going to bother about it, I accept the risk around it. So those kind of entries were there. So I would remove all of those and then would give you a consolidated list that, hey, out of the 10,000 vulnerabilities detected, these are the 50 odd you need to work on, and you can report to these people. That was one area. I was also looking at Guardium, which was a database log monitoring system. Then I was looking at WebSense or your Symantec logs. And what I realized at that point was the information that these systems provide is useful in its own. But if you start correlating that information, you can get a lot more detail and value out of it. Like, for example, if I want to know how many Windows machines are there in the environment, if my golden image has Symantec endpoint pre-configured in it to report to my Symantec server, All I have to do is look at the Symantec server log. The number of machines reporting back are the number of live machines with a very sure certainty. Now, even if their tech stack is changed and they are behaving to say Nessus as a Linux machine, I know for a fact that if Symantec AV Windows version is reporting back to me, this is a Windows box. Those kind of correlations. Things like if a certain machine sends maybe 1 million DNS requests within, say, 15 minutes time frame to say a DGA based domain name, there's a fair certainty that particular box has a malware on it. Even though I'm blocking the web request saying this is an unauthorized domain request, but the actual cause is not the person, but a malware sitting on that box. So those sort of correlations is where I started realizing, yeah, there is a bigger potential in the system. And this correlation is what matters a lot. So I started working in that aspect. That's when I jumped into, say, Infosys, then PA consulting. Then I did a 1.5 year of freelancing work. And I think 2015 is when I joined Not So Secure and been here since then.
That's a great journey. Yeah. Talking about that, if it is not InfoSec, what else will you do?
A mix of robotics and maybe, I think robotics would be the area.
Sure. When I look at the projects you build, I can see how all these are later on helped you make these projects. For example, when you talk about Android Tamr, these distributions, experience with distributions helped you later on. Yes. Automation also helped you when you started Code Vigilant, I think.
Yep.
But yeah, we want to hear it from you. So can you talk about your 2 big projects? I know you work with lots of other projects. Many of them wouldn't have released and many of them would be personal. But people know you for these 2 big projects, Android Tamr and Code Vigilant. So tell us about them.
So Android Tamr actually came out of a necessity. 2010 is when I started with this project. And I think I did a Club Hack talk around that time to introduce this particular project.
The idea You're turning 10 years now.
Yeah. Right? So the idea was very simple. I needed a system where I have tools pre-configured as per my need. And this was something a lot of people were trying to solve the same problem. There was Backtrack Linux, which was trying to solve the same problem. There was, I think, Whoopix, there was Knoppix, and there were a bunch of other similar distributions that were available. But none of them were focusing on Android particularly. And what I realized was Android is a lot Linux, very less non-Linuxy components. So I started looking at it, okay, what can I do and how can I help people? Because everyone used to waste a lot of time building that setup. Just getting the right tools to run properly was a bigger task. And considering the scenario, Android was one thing where every developer was releasing different tools. So you
exactly. I want to echo some statements on that. Android system is very fragmented. Yes. Not just the distribution that goes into all the devices. The developers are fragmented as well. They code in whatever language they are comfortable with. One thing I used to face was that once I set up a particular tool to run on my system, for running the other tool, you need a separate version of Python or Ruby. And then that means you sit spinning up another machine. And you solved all that in a very different manner. That's why I wanted to ask you about structured thinking as well, because you took some step back and came up with this repository. It is not easy to maintain repository because I have built Linux distributions and it is easy to just set up a machine, make an image and just distribute it. But you must have done some root cause analysis and went back, like took few steps back and came up with the distribution, made sure that all the dependencies are met. And it is not an easy work. So yeah, sorry for interrupting. So you were saying, yeah.
So effectively, how I like to call myself is, no matter what anyone says, there is only one skill that I have, and that's troubleshooting. If I have a problem, I would try to find a solution for it. Android Tamer came into existence because of that, because I had a problem. I had to reconfigure systems every time. So I wanted an automation around that. The second aspect which you talked about was another major challenge which was there. So someone is writing in Python 2, someone in Python 3, someone in Ruby a certain version, and another tool is in a certain different version. Then you had Perl, and then bunch of other things which would basically just create a mess up. Like Java itself, there are tools in Java 8 which will not run in Java 10, Java 11 which will not run in Java 8, and different distributions handle these things differently. Now, I initially started by basically doing what every other infosec distribution that you would find would do, which is basically install the OS in a VM, configure the tools as per your need, maybe create a folder on desktop, put all the tools in there, and set everything up, take an OVA export out of it, and make it available. That works when you're doing it one time. But the moment you talk about, hey, I want to create the next version, the problem that came was I was not even finding the motivation to do that. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is not going to work out. I need a better way to deal with it. So I started looking at it, okay, how can I automate all of this? So I started looking at, say, Red Hat's form of preceding the content to Debian pre-configuration setups. And then I got introduced to things like Vagrant, Ansible. And that's when I started realizing, hey, I can do a lot of these things via leveraging these newer tools like Vagrant and Ansible combination. So I started using those tools. But then the next problem that I faced was I'm still placing the tools in my own way into different directories, and they're not forming a cohesive system. So that's when I started looking at building packages of my own. Now, again, I am a lazy person. So I never went the full way. The full way would have been to create a repository which is Debian compatible and is recognized by Debian, and rather not just keep the packages in my repo, but rather push them across to Debian itself, and Debian maintains those packages. That's the sort of the golden route that you should be doing. I never went that way because this was too long a process. There were a lot of checks and balances that I had to do. I wanted something that solves my problem. So I started using something called FPM, or a effing package manager, which is basically a nice way of keeping a script where you keep a folder structure, point that script to the folder structure, it'll create a Debian on an RPM package for you, and you can install that package and things would go in the right places. Now, the problem that you talked about, that, hey, if it is Java this version or Java that version, those problems I basically solved by creating custom launch pads for everything. And each of these launch pads would basically look at the requirement and switch themselves around. So if a application, or rather the general set of applications are Java 8 dependent, my default Java would be Java 8. But whenever an application which needs a higher version of Java comes up, it'll basically switch the environment variables to Java, the newer version, and then it'll run that code. And then once everything is done, you exit the application, it'll switch back everything all to the base system and would exit out of it. So those scripts were part of the learnings that I had while doing all these automation bits. So all of that came in handy. Same applies for, say, CodeVigilant. With CodeVigilant, the idea that I had, or the problem statement that I had, was I was basically asked to do code review. And I was like, I have no idea how to do code review. So I started reading about it, how to do code reviews, and I learned about, hey, these are the patterns that people look for, and these are the things. So I thought, okay, I want to increase my capabilities in this domain, and I want to learn as much as I can. So how should I start about it? So the one idea that came in mind was to have a large set of code where I can look for findings. Because if I start looking at a small code base, trying to find all sorts of vulnerabilities in it, I am not going to find everything. And it is going to be a tedious effort going through all of it. I wanted to hone my skills into spotting the vulnerability and a large set of them. So I picked up WordPress plugin and themes ecosystem, which was at that point, I think around 30,000 plugins and around 8,000 themes. Now, how I ended up doing was I basically SVN checked out every single repository onto my local system. And then I started with using grep, then realized grep has limitations. So went with ribgrep and did bunch of regular expressions for it. So I would know what pattern I'm looking for. I would use something like Notepad++ or Sublime to actually find that and then build a pattern around it. And at that point, things like CodeQL or SemGrep did not existed. These would have eased out a lot of my pain, but they never existed at that point. So it was more of grep, first look for a keyword, and then look for anything that could negate the problem. Like for example, if there's a MySQL query happening, but there is a escape string inside it. So they've taken the user input, but they've escaped the string and then they have inserted it. I don't care about that. That's already fixed stuff. But if the variable is directly taken in, I need to see that. So I would end up creating smaller scripts which would do that job for me, the initial gathering, and then I would do the automated analysis on it. Interesting challenges were validating those. So I ended up building a bunch of automation around that. And with all these automations that I was building, be it Android Tamer, be it Code Vigilant, one thing that kind of got grilled into me, I think from the initial days, was the open source community, which is why you would find a lot of these projects, or rather what I try to do is, if I put a project out in public, I would try to put the code behind the project also in public. So if you right now go to say github.com/Android Tamer, you would find the entire script for building the Vagrant Ansible box, two scripts to build every single package that I have in the repository. Same with Code Vigilant. All the automations that I built were made available to public, so you can experiment around it. The bigger challenges were not finding the bugs, but were around reporting the bugs, making sure people understand what I'm trying to say there, and dealing with with all these different systems. Because I was an independent researcher. I was not alone. I had Prajal along with me. Madhu joined somewhere later in the scheme of things. So we three were working on this. And we had to communicate with the developer, with the WordPress community managers, so that they are aware that one of the plugins or themes has a problem. Everyone had different ways of accepting the submission. Some would say, hey, I can accept entry via email. Some would say, I would only accept PGP encrypted security reports. Some would say, it's an organization. You have to submit a contact us form. Some would say, hey, send one email with all the issues that you have found. Someone else would say, hey, send one email per issue because I use Inbox as a tracking mechanism. So everyone had different ways of dealing with it. And then came the other part, how do I ensure everyone is aware of it? Which is where CVE comes into picture. To be honest, initially I had high hopes about CVE, that CVE is a vulnerability tracking database. It contains every single vulnerability that is there in the world. Took me a year to realize that's not the case. CVE database contains, it's a non-profit organization which is trying to create a database of major bugs. You cannot have every single bug indexed into CVEs. So nowadays, when someone talks about, hey, CVE has everything, okay, nope, CVE does not have everything. Even I ended up stopping to submit CVEs because I ended up in a situation where I had 300, 400 bugs listed with me. Every single bug, if I have to send an email out for a CVE request, the work itself is such a big task. And then the follow-ups, because it's not that you just send an email and it's done. An email response would come up, would have a CV number, you then have to add it somewhere else. I ended up stopping the whole process. I'm making the information available. If someone wants to assign CV, they go ahead and do it. I am not going to bother about doing that, but rather I would ensure that I contact the WordPress community and ensure that they are aware. So a lot of these, so if you see Code Vigilant, if you go into the disclosure page, you would see the status as closed for a bunch of plugins. Those were closed because the author or the maintainer said, hey, I'm not going to work on this. And the WordPress community said, okay, the security bug is there, we are not going to allow it. So they shut that down. So yeah, I think that's the two major projects and the way things have been working with it.
Sure. I think of Code Vigilant as Google's Project Zero, but focusing more towards WordPress because
the initial idea was WordPress. There are a bunch of things that I've done behind closed doors which are not yet made available. I wanted to expand the scope because, see, the idea was not finding bugs. The idea was learning code review. So the next step was looking at other languages. And the fun fact that I see is I talked about SemGrep or CodeQL. Even if you look at those languages right now, they don't have support for PHP. Every single InfoSec person in the world is going to diss on PHP that PHP is the most insecure language, but no one wants to work towards securing PHP. There are a handful of people who are actually trying to do a good job at that. No one even wants to write a tool which finds bugs in PHP code. So the idea was
that is a sad part that I wanted to discuss with you, because PHP is one of the, like, it is very portable because you see tons of hosting platforms providing PHP support, and WordPress is a super hit. So because of that, many sellers, like small shopkeepers, they use WordPress. Many blogs exist on top of WordPress, and there are social media networks even on top of WordPress. And all of those code on PHP. And there is a general tendency from the industry to close an eye on that part, blaming everything on PHP. And that is one thing that I wanted to talk to you, because when you address problems, you addressed problem for a mass community by deciding to pick on WordPress and PHP first. And those type of thinking only comes from when you are applying critical thinking or root cause analysis to these problems. And I have seen that when you are presenting in conferences as well, there is a proper structure, there is a proper way. And I always enjoyed attending your sessions because it is not just technical. There is technical thing you can learn from Stack Overflow or books, and you can build something. But the thinking, that is different. And that is something people not often talk about. So I wanted to learn about that as well. I'm sure you went through all these when you decided to start with WordPress, PHP. So I want to know firsthand, like what actually making you think like that, or what are the things that you kept in, like, were going in your mind when starting these projects?
So if you remember, I said that there is one core skill that I have, which is troubleshooting. There is one other motto which I live by: play by your strengths. And the strength that I had was Linux. And I started dealing with WordPress, I think 2007 onwards. Since 2007, I've been maintaining my own blog. And this is one thing I recommend everyone. I don't see a lot of that happening, but anyone who is working in information security industry should actually, defender or attacker, whosoever they may be, they need to buy a $5 a month server, ensure that it is on all the time, have your own website running on it in a language of your choice, not a static website, like not a Hugo build static web pages, but a language of your choice. And that's when you realize the pain that a defender or a developer goes through to ensure things are working round the clock. But when you talk about the motivation came from, because of one area, this was a tool that I was already using. So I was familiar with the environment. Second, I'm lazy. I want to do things which are easily understandable to me. Third part, I had skills which I could easily translate and use here. And the other aspect was the community was very large. And like I said, I wanted to learn things in masses. So while I was finding the bugs, if you remember, I said that the rules were, or the grep patterns were, look for a string and then look for things which does not have that the other keywords, and just find the right set of problematic statements. But at the same time, I was looking at the stuff that contained the string but was discarded because there was some checks and balances placed into it. And that actually made me realize how each of the problem can actually be solved, because within that 30,000 or 40,000 odd code bases, someone has solved that problem in a different way already. So I just had to look at the other codes and see, oh, this was an easier solution. Then when the developer contacts me, hey, you reported an SQL injection, how can I solve it here? So these are the ways in which these people have solved this problem. You can pick any one of them and move forward with this. The other thing is, with PHP, the documentation was good. And it was the reason why PHP is very popular is because it is easy to get started with it. I think everyone remembers how print hello world, or printing your own name after taking an input from a keyboard on a Java application looks like 20, 30 odd lines. And then you get to a point where you can actually do something. Compared to those, at that point, PHP was a language which was quick to get started with. And like you said, a lot of the web hosts used to provide that as a service. So something which was very readily available, something which could be picked up, and something which needed someone to look at. Because not many people want to look at WordPress, want to look at PHP, because everyone says, hey, there is problems in there. But yes, there are problems. Someone needs to do something about that. So this was my effort, and not exactly just my alone effort. Like I said, Prajal and I basically, so the story goes, I was thinking about doing something like this. I was at a Null Bangalore meet, and Prajal was sitting next to me, and he was saying, hey, I'm facing these issues and I want to learn this and that. I was like, hey, this is something that I have in mind. And they're like, okay, let's get started. And that's how we two basically started working on it. Then I met Madhu when he was deputed to one of the remote hill stations. I went there for some purpose and we ended up talking. And then the end result was that, hey, this sounds like a cool idea. Can I also start contributing to it? And then he started helping things out.
Sure. Talking about that, how is that collaboration happening? Because the mindset can be different and the location can be different, but there is idea that unifying you people, and but at the same time, you need to manage the contributions that are happening. The direction should be there. So how are you making that all work?
Couple of things anyone who is leading a project has to keep in mind. Contributors are contributors. They are helping you out of their own free time. Don't put a very time constrained sort of responsibilities over their head. Don't put expectations with them. You need to be flexible enough. And this is where, don't expect anything in return to whatever you do, and don't give people the idea that they can expect something from you. So keeping everything in open, keeping everything in public, and doing things in such a way that if you want to contribute, help me. If you don't want to contribute, that's fine. I'm going to do work my way. If you want to take something extra, if you want to work on something else, might as well join us. And that's kind of how I've taken the whole community approach and collaboration approach. The aspect about being at different locations is not exactly something that I face a lot in my projects, but it's something that I faced within the current company where I am. Because when we started, we had one clear rule. This is going to be 100% remote company. 2015 onwards, I've been telling every single government official that, hey, people can work from home. It is not that if you are working in a company that you have to go to an office and work. People can work from home. What I realized was just similar to community contribution, uh, working remotely also has the same thing. One, you need to trust the other person. If you cannot trust them, don't work. As simple as that. Trust is important. With remote culture, you need to trust the other party. I say trust, it's more of like, this is the task that you need to do. You give me the time frame in which you want to do that task. I am not going to bother you every 5 minutes. What's the status? Maybe if it's a longer run, I'd bump in between every week or every 2 weeks, but I'm going to let you work on it. The same applies with these kind of things. Keep the contribution open. Like, if you want to contribute, you contribute. If you cannot contribute, that's fine. Life happens. People get other priorities, and anything that is eating your free time, this is free time that you're spending on open source projects. Anything that is eating your free time would be replaced with something that comes up at last minute. And that's perfectly fine. If you stop worrying about that, it is much easier to handle open source projects.
Sure. Talking about open source projects, other than the two projects we talked about, you recently started Hacking Archives of India. Could you tell us about that?
So a bunch of different connection strings around that. One disclaimer, the source code of it, or the actual files which I have, I am not making them public. And there's a valid reason behind that. But the content in those files are anyways available within the website that I have. Now, if you look at the keyword that I picked, Hacking Archives of India, the idea was that in India, there has been a whole, I think Indian people have been active in the InfoSec industry way back, I think 20, 23 years. But people don't know that people were active back then. People are not even aware that there are Indians who are working in 5G research right now. There are Indians who are working in IoT. There are Indians who have basically pick any field. And there are resident Indians and there are non-resident Indians who are working on those fields. And people are not aware of them. Within the InfoSec community, there are generally 2-3 different kind of people. People who are more into academics, people who are more into promoting themselves, and people who are doing activities in public but are not promoting themselves. And then there is this last breed of people who are awesome people. They know everything in and out, but they don't want their name out anywhere. So the idea was to not look at that aspect. The people who don't want to be known, they don't need to be known. But people who have made public contributions, if I can bring all of that contribution at one place so that people can know that, okay, this person has done these things. So that was the idea behind Hacking Archives of India. Now, I did a bit of an SEO work in it. So if you look at the website, the title says Hackers of India. One pet peeve of mine have always been, if you search for Hackers of India, you get all sorts of names, nowhere related to anything technical that they would have done, or maybe they might have done it, but there's no conclusive proof anywhere in public. It's more of a myth created around a lot of those people that, hey, they are super talented, but any chance given to them to prove their talent has not resulted in any useful outcome. So the idea was that if I have these SEO keywords in and I have the right names, the right kind of people can actually get the visibility. So if you look at the front page of the website, I basically listed the names of people based on the number of conference talks that they've done. Now, I know the format that I have is not 100% right way of judging things. And I'm not judging there. I am just listing out my own research around who are the Indians who have done stuff in open source world or in information security world, to be honest. Initially, when I started with it, I had an idea that, hey, there would be around 250 odd people who would have presented in international conferences and would have been regular occurrences in different conferences. Now, there are regular occurrences. There are a person like Somil sir who have basically presented in, name a conference and he would have presented there. Two people who have basically just presented once and never turned back. And by looking at these people's profile, I found one profile where the person presented on a very technical topic at a Black Hat conference. And 3 or 4 years down the line, right now, the person is a professional photographer. The official designation of the job that they have is nowhere in information security space. They're into professional photography now. So different people, when you look at the background of these people, one challenge, and that's the reason why I basically spelled out my degree and the thing that I'm not from computer science, because a lot of times people who come up in this industry are not from computer science, not from IT. And they are basically discouraged by a lot of people that, hey, if you don't know the basics of computers, if you don't know about these, if you've not studied algorithms, if you don't know ON or O raised to power n kind of things, you cannot succeed in this field. Now, that's where, if you look at all these illuminaries of our field, you'd find a lot of them have got no bearings into computer science. They're from totally different area and they're doing good. They're doing good research. They're continuously doing research. So that was the whole idea, that bring these profiles forward. The other thing which I basically dislike about the information security community particularly, people don't, there is one aspect which is about bragging about themselves. There is another aspect which is basically making yourself known that you know this thing and people can approach you. A lot of people don't even do that. So that's why I created this small profile page. Initially, I did not even wanted to keep profile photographs. I just wanted to keep their name, LinkedIn ID, Twitter ID, GitHub profile, Bitbucket profile, and those profiles, and what kind of talks that they've done. But then I ended up adding the profile photo because a couple of people who I shown this website before it was launched, they said, hey, if you add a profile photograph, it'll give better visibility. Now, a lot of these people I know personally, but what I've done here is, if a person does not want their photograph in public, I'm not going to put their photograph in public. So I have a couple of profiles where I know the person directly. They are in my Facebook list and I have photographs of them, but they don't have a photograph on Twitter. They don't have a photograph on LinkedIn. So I've not kept the photograph. I was talking about the criteria, what is kept on the website. I am trying to learn about this. So I started with looking at Black Hat, DEF CON, and then other conferences, and I'm documenting the journey that I'm doing. The plan in future is to look at tools that people have developed, look at the white papers that people have written, and look at a bunch of other things. But the typical problem that comes is, let's say I have one person who has a CV for reflected cross-site scripting in a web application that is used by, say, 200 people. Versus I have another person who has a CV for VMware hypervisor escape from a confined Windows guest. So you're a limited user in a Windows guest, you bypass things and you end up compromising the hypervisor. It's one CV count both ways. I can't quantify between them. And the quantification is the aspect which is the tricky part. So I didn't want to get into all of that in the initial phases. So I picked up the criteria that, hey, let's look at international conferences, because there is obviously a jury sitting behind selecting those talks. So there is some selection process already happening. And we can then assume that all talks are equal. All talks have similar ranking numbers. And they're just listed out that, hey, this person has done these many talks, this person has done these many talks. Does not mean that if a person has done 2 talks ever, is anyways less contributing member than someone who has done 38 or 40 talks. All of them have their own contributions. It is just, if I want to look at a breadth of topics, I would like to look at a person who has done multiple talks over a large period of time versus someone who has done a talk maybe 2 times in 1 year when they launched the project and then they stopped doing public activities. So that was kind of the whole Hacking Archives of India concept that is there. I think I right now have around 500 entries online listed. And due to all this Christmas and December timeframe, which is a busy time frame for me, I've got around 500 entries in draft. So they need to be published. So we'll have around 1,000 entries in total. The next aspect that I want to now work on is, and I'm working with the intern and a fresher, is trying to see if we can basically tag these talks with relevant context. So if a topic is, if the talk was around mobile security, so mobile keyword gets added to the talk. And then the idea would be that, hey, for a particular keyword, these are the people who are Indian and have talked about this particular topic. And here are the contact details. Like here's the LinkedIn ID, here's the GitHub profile, here is Twitter, and you can connect with these people. So I had one intern, a fun story. So I had 2 interns who basically helped me in this. One of them was a lady. She was initially not happy when she was finding the names because there was no lady in it. And then ladies started appearing, and she was like, okay, yeah, I have people who have done this kind of things before I even started working on, and these are people in the same community, so I can connect with them. I know that there are people around. Similarly, the other intern who was working with, when he started working on it, he was like, there's too many things going on. How do I understand what is what, and how does this works? A hidden motive behind Hacking Archives of India. I wanted to learn how Hugo works. So Hugo is a Go-based static website generator. So the entire website is built on Hugo. So I wanted to learn how it works. And I wanted to learn how the intricacies of it work. So all of these pages that you see on the site, they're all auto-generated based on a markdown file that I create per talk. So that markdown file contains topics like this is the date, this is the hacker's name, these are the presentation links and a bunch of other details. This is the conference, and it'll create pages like for Black Hat conference, these many talks are done. For this particular person, these many talks are there. So learning about the actual theme also. Then I, just like every other website of mine, I built the theme from scratch. Another hidden motive, I wanted to build a website which has 0 JavaScript in it. So if you look at Hacking Archives of India, there is 0 JavaScript on it. It's purely CSS and HTML5. And this is, I think, the first website where I have a CSP which says default deny.
That is
no
cool.
JavaScript loading at all.
Now, you talked about not disclosing the source code of this particular tool. It makes sense because it is actually fetching information from various...
Not exactly that part. Fetching part is not the problem. The problem is, I initially thought about making this a community project. The aim was to build a portfolio of people who are working in this domain who wanted to be publicly known. If I make it public, the end result would be everyone would start pushing their own profile, glorified profile around every single thing that they've done. Now, I don't want all of that data. I am not equipped to handle all of that data. And that's not the motive of it. So that's why I'm not making the code base public. It's there on GitHub, but it's in a private repo. I'm not going to make it public ever. The content is anyways in public. It's just that I am not going to make the markdown files public, not going to ask community to contribute. Because see, if I ask community to contribute, everyone is going to ask questions, have their own thoughts, have their own ideas. I want something which I want to enjoy. And this is my way of spending time enjoying learning about the history of Indian InfoSec community. if I start having these pressure around, hey, what's the criteria, how you're doing this, why you're not adding this, why you're adding this, all sorts of those things, one, the joy moves out. So this is counter to my earlier argument that I want community to work. There are going to be projects where you don't want the community to be involved. When you have a very clear set objective and you want to spend time on it, spend effort on it, you do it alone. You don't ask for contribution. Again, when you don't ask for contribution, you are taking the whole responsibility. So the success of the project, the failure of the project, it's all yours. You have to keep your head held high. If it fails, if it succeeds, whatever.
Sure. We are moving to the last question of the day. Before heading to that, thanks a lot for coming here, giving your story. I really appreciate you coming forward. You are really an inspiration. The talks, knowledge transfer, the way you are mentoring lots of people, those things are that I look forward to, I admire, and I'm sure many people in the industry does the same. So the last question is, do you have any message for the audience?
So I've said a couple of things. One, always play by your strengths, but that basically means you need to have strengths. And in the industry where we are, you need to be generalist with a specialization in one area. You need to know everything that is going on around, but you need to be specialized in one area and use that as your core pivotal strength and work around it. That's one. Second, everyone is human in this industry. Don't idolize people. If you keep someone at a high pedestal, it'll break your heart at one point in time. Everyone is doing their own job. They're all learning. Everyone is learning. We are all here to learn together. Don't assume that, hey, this person has done something, I cannot do it. Or if this person is doing something, I should do exactly the same. Both of these are problematic equations. So for freshers, build your strength. For someone who is in the industry for some time, play by your strengths. And for someone who is in management or above area, just be very clear that when you're leading a team, and this is more of a team leader thing that I've learned over time, when you're leading a team, care for your people. You don't have to care for yourself. You care for them and they're going to care for you. So I think that's what it is.